I'm going to talk to you today about psychopaths. I have absolutely no expertise in psychopathy whatsoever, other than writing a book about it. That means that I'm not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, have no remotely relevant qualifications at all. It didn't stop me writing the last 10 books I've written, which were about health-related topics and education-related topics. I'm probably better known for my first book, which is a book called Sweet Poison, which is about why we shouldn't be eating sugar because it all makes us horrifically fat. But it gave me the license because so many people seem to want to know about how not to be fat. It gave me the license with a publisher to let me write about whatever I wanted to write about. And the latest thing I've wanted to write about is something that's been troubling me my entire career. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention what I really do. My day job is as a lawyer. So clearly, I have a lot of exposure to the topic of this book. And throughout my career as a lawyer, and then a slight detour into doing a tech startup, I encountered a venture capital financed tech startup, which of course meant I was talking to psychopaths every day of the week. In that detour, and in my original career, I encountered a lot of the type of people I'm going to be talking about today, and I wish I'd had this book, because they confused and befuddled me, endangered my financial security, endangered that of my family, endangered every business that they got involved with. And there are some really very simple things that we all need to know about them. And what I've tried to do is collect those together in one place. So I'm going to talk about some of them today. First of all, what do I mean by a psychopath? A blank screen, by the looks. Here we go. I don't mean that. That's where the term got turned away from its original meaning in the English language. Norman Bates was not a psychopath. He's far too delusional to be a psychopath. Psychopaths are not delusional, and they are rarely killers. The ones we're going to be talking about today probably won't kill you, unless they have to. So that's not a psychopath. A psychopath is something that's been part of the human species ever since we started collecting together in groups. Inuit had a word for it, Coolangatta. Now, a Coolangatta repeatedly lies, cheats and steals, won't go hunting for polar bear, and when the other men do, he takes advantage of their women. That's a pretty good definition of psychopath, a good working definition I'd like you to keep in your mind. Also their solution, which is kill them, is pretty much the only effective solution outside of some of the very narrow constraints that I'll suggest at the end of this talk. Psychopaths are not people who can be threatened. They're not people who will change. They will do what they will do, and all you've got to do is recognize it. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more detail about what a psychopath is. A lot of people have the first chap with the mask up there and the Silence of the Lambs in mind, but the modern psychopath is much more like the other two. They are people who will do anything to win, and they do not care at all about the costs to anybody else in doing it. The definition of a psychopath was first written down and published in a book in 1941 called The Mask of Sanity. That's the book. That's the definition, all of those wonderful features, and it hasn't changed since. Today, you cannot be diagnosed as suffering from psychopathy. There is no such mental disorder. Never has been. It is not in the official psychiatric guides. The closest you can get is antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, and I defy anyone to read the definitions of those two and tell me the difference. They're all exactly the same, and they're very, very close to what this book defined as a psychopath. Let's just run through a few of these wonderful features of psychopathy. The first is, the first time you ever met a psychopath, they were probably the most charming person you've ever met in your entire life. you would have come away from that first meeting thinking, oh my God, they are incredible, they are terrific. And the reason you will have come away from that with that belief is because they wanted you to. They are masters at reflecting back to you what you want to hear. They can read you like a book and they can reflect back exactly what you want to hear. You can help them enormously by putting all the kinds of things that interest you on your social media. Then they don't have to surreptitiously question you without you realizing during your first meeting. But they will reflect back to you if they want to impress you, if they want to get something from you. If they don't want something from you, they'll blank you, completely ignore you, have nothing to do with you. And that just tells you that you're of no value to them. Either because you're a psychopath yourself and can't be manipulated, which they will detect almost immediately, or they don't think you have anything of value. Okay, so, by the way, it's helpful, I find, to keep a picture of the United States President in your mind as you are reading through this list. Because he is a walking, talking, breathing, daily example of all of these characteristics. Barely a day goes by when he doesn't exhibit one of these things. That's not to say he's the only politician that fits this category. He's just the most florid. So, they're self-obsessed. Everything is about them. Everything that happens in the world is about them. The Russians are attacking because of them. The Russians are not attacking because of them. Whatever it is, it's because of them. They're a fluent liar. In fact, they never stop lying. They lie all the time. Because to them, lying has nowhere near the weight it has to the rest of us. To the rest of us, lying is something we have to think about doing. It's about intentionally misdirecting. It's about saying something that we know is not correct. To them, you say what needs to be said at that moment in time. Whether it's correct or not is an irrelevant piece of information. And if we want to call that lying and overlay some sort of negativity to that, then that's our problem, not theirs. This is how they think. They're emotionally manipulative. This is their mode of operation. You can tell when a psychopath joins a otherwise cooperative workplace. From the minute they walk in, they spot little fractures in the emotional surface of the workplace. Little things that are irritating us about each other. It happens in all groups of humans. We don't all get on as well as we like to think we do. Psychopaths pick up on it immediately and then start driving whacking great wedges into those little cracks and making sure that Jane, who is a little bit irritated by Mark in accounts, really hates him now. And Mark in accounts doesn't trust Jane anymore either, even though before he might have allowed her to look after his children or something like that. The psychopath will pick up on the smallest things, exaggerate them, and use secrecy and one-on-one communication with different people in the workplace to create a smokescreen of emotional distress. Why do they want to create a smokescreen of emotional distress? Because while we're all fighting with each other, they can get on with feathering their nest. Okay, so there's a few other things here. They're completely lacking in remorse or guilt, which means they cannot be shamed at all. They do not care what you think of them at all. They cannot be punished or threatened because they care not for tomorrow. They care about what happens today, how they get better, how they get more today. It doesn't matter what happens tomorrow. Threaten them about tomorrow, they'll see what happens. It certainly isn't going to change what they do today. They take absolutely no responsibility for their actions, are completely impulsive, have parasitic lifestyles, which means they're lazy. If you have a psychopath as your boss, then this is a person who does nothing. You will be doing all the work, they will be taking all the credit. They're highly controlling and enormously vindictive. enormously vindictive. Do not underestimate how vindictive a psychopath will be. The smallest slight against them will be cause for lifelong vengeance against you. This makes these people very dangerous to deal with. Not least because of the last one, they're aggressive and intimidating. So they sound like great people. Oh, by the way, how many people in the room are psychopaths? Yeah, didn't think so. Now, by the way, the stats tell us about a fifth of you probably are. Well, not this room, but in a normal room, a fifth of the people probably are. And none of them would admit it. Okay. So, there's lots of words for psychopaths. Sociopath, psychopath, bully, narcissist. They all mean psychopath. They all mean someone who is completely lacking in empathy. That's how they can do all the rest of the things in that list. They don't care at all about other human beings. To them, another human being is just a tool to be used. And if that person gets hurt, so what? It's them, not me. Now, to most humans, that can't happen. We can't allow another person to be harmed. Well, we can, but it really hurts. And we'd really prefer not to. Really prefer not to. Try to avoid it as much as possible. There's a really good reason for that, and it's to do with the thing that makes humans the most powerful animals on the planet. That. Every major religion, every major philosophy has that in it. That is not a Christian rule. It's in everything. Judaism, love your neighbour as yourself. Islam, love your brother as you love yourself. And so on. Even Scientology, try to treat others as you would want them to treat you. It's there for a reason. It encodes the basic, fundamental reason that humans work. All of us are Human 2.0. Human 2.0 had an upgrade which allowed us to work with other humans who we don't know and are not related to and don't wish to kill. No other animal on the planet can do that. Other animals can work together in family groups in exceptional circumstances, or as part of a hive where they're all essentially the same animal. But none can do what humans do, which is clump together in groups of strangers and cooperate without hurting each other. Human 1.0 didn't have that capacity. And when you get into the biology of it, by the way, I love graphs, so tough if you don't. When you get into the biology of it, where empathy comes from in humans, which is the ability to feel what another human is feeling. This is what stops us hurting each other. We feel what another person is feeling. If we hurt them, we hurt ourselves. It's a great insurance policy that makes us cooperate. And when you get to the biology of it, it comes from something called a spindle neuron. A spindle neuron is a very long neuron that connects the front part of our brain, the most recently evolved part of our brain, the bit that has our impulse control, our higher decision making, our decision, all of our future planning and scenario imagination, all in that place, connects that to the amygdala, which is our primitive brain. Most animals don't have it. They've studied as many as they can, and they've found that the density in humans is incredibly high compared to just about anything else. Over on the left here, we've got the chimpanzee. The bonobo, another kind of chimpanzee, pretty small. Gorilla, doing better. Elephant, doing even better, but mostly because of the size of the brain we're talking about. Human newborn, about 50% better than an elephant, which is the best we've got anywhere outside of humans. Then a human 4-year-old, several orders of magnitude higher. Massive difference in humans. And then a human adult. So the first thing you should take from that graph is that all babies are psychopaths. And anyone who's ever met one would agree. And think about that. a baby is focused intently on the only thing that really matters, staying alive. And the mother or the father is there to make sure that happens. They are expert manipulators. And they are expert manipulators with a purpose, which is to gather resources to themselves. They don't care about your emotions, they don't care about your feelings, they don't have the ability to. Their spindle neuron count is far too low. By the time they get to 4 years old, though, it's a different story altogether. Most humans have received the human 2.0 upgrade by then, which is the spindle neuron count, and by 4 years of age are capable of empathy. Which means they can put themselves in your position and feel what you feel. They feel what you are feeling, and it stops them hurting you, mostly. The other implication from that graph is that you should be able to tell by 4 years old whether that happened. If they've still got a human newborn count at 4 years old, then they're probably a psychopath, because that's where it will stay the rest of their lives. By the way, you can tell all of that on an MRI. So, what does that imply? Psychopaths are social predators. All of us are just the feeding grounds. Tools that can be used to provide value to them. And they can do that with impunity because they don't care how we feel. They see this as a strength. We see it as a horrible, evil weakness. They see the fact that we see it that way as a weakness in us. They don't feel they have a problem. They think we have the problem, and it makes us easy to exploit. Okay, so you're wondering by now, where are the psychopaths? Where am I going to find them? Now this comes from a fairly significant study. I mean, a little bit flawed in that it is self-reported, in that it's a UK university. You want to anonymously go on and you say, you fill in this test and it's supposed to tell you whether you're a psychopath or not, but as part of it they ask you your occupation. And these are the top 10 in order: CEO, lawyer, media, salesperson, surgeon, journalist, etc. That doesn't mean there aren't psychopaths in other professions, just that they're a little bit thicker on the ground in these professions. I think the two important professions are not up there, which are probably very, very thick with psychopaths, but they obviously don't do online surveys. Journalists are up there. Actors are very thick on the ground with psychopaths, and of course acting for ugly people are politicians. Neither of them are up there, and like I say, probably because they don't want to go and do online surveys and they already know exactly what they are. Okay, and then there's procurement. Okay, 2016 study says 21% of procurement managers show psychopathic traits. Not surprising, honestly. Most of the professions that I had up there on that list were in that range, sort of about 1/5. By the time you get to the top of an organisation, to a position of power, you are likely to encounter a lot of psychopaths. In positions without power, caring type professions, nursing, teaching, social worker, etc. like that, where there's not a lot of individual power and there's a lot of dependence on you, there's a lot lower density of psychopaths. Doesn't mean there are none, just a lot lower density. In positions where you have power over others, it goes up a lot. Procurement's one of those positions. Tends to be towards the top of an organisation, tends to be pretty thick with psychopaths. Why does that matter? If we go back to thinking about the traits of a psychopath, the key one is the lack of empathy. The lack of empathy means you cannot cooperate. You cannot design an outcome which benefits someone other than yourself. Psychopaths care only about themselves. If you happen to benefit from something that I do, then that's an accident. And probably means I've left something on the table. That's what a psychopath thinks. Procurement can't work that way. You all know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You're entering into relationships with people that last years, decades. You need that to be able to function. You can't possibly go in on the basis that all that matters is winning today, getting the best deal today, and screw what happens tomorrow. So it's critically important that in an organisation that I think I heard one of the speakers here before say that's responsible for 64% of the capital of the organisation is being controlled by a psychopath is not a good thing at all. Okay, so what do you do about it? Well, don't hire them. It's the best thing to do. Unfortunately, that's a little bit easier said than done. Remember that I say the first time you meet them, especially if you own something they want, that will be the most charming and wondrous person you'll ever met in your life. And it is aided and abetted by the fact that they have no trouble at all lying about stuff, like where they went to university, what qualifications they've got, who they last worked for. All of the sorts of things that you might think no one would ever lie about this because they know I would check, they do. Because they don't care if you check. If you check, they'll move on. Most people don't check. It's a great movie. I just put this in because I like the concept. A movie called Blade Runner. Now, in Blade Runner, the basic concept of Blade Runner is that there's a whole series of androids amongst us who are the labour force of the future. And they look human. In fact, they are human in every single possible respect, except they have no empathy. And there's this machine that they have, which is a photo of that on the screen at the moment, which detects, they call them replicants, by the way, which detects whether or not a person is a replicant. And they sit them down, they ask them 30-odd questions, and then by the end of it, the machine says this person's a replicant or they aren't, based on their response to these questions. You can do the test, by the way. It's online. You can go, just type Google, "Are you a replicant?" You'll get the website, and you can take the test. They are, by the way, a journalist did the test on a series of mayoral candidates in San Francisco a few years ago, without them knowing. They were just put across as normal journalistic questions. A little odd, but normal questions. Found that almost all of the candidates were replicants, and the guy that won scored the highest on the replicant test. So there are tests you can do, but good psychopaths can get around a test. They know what they're being tested for, and they know how to avoid it. They've spent their entire lives pretending to be human. Doing a test is not a big deal. You will not catch them that way. You will inevitably hire them. By the way, there are some other things that you can't do to detect them, and one thing that you can. So a lot of studies that say that psychopaths prefer gin and tonic, prefer their coffee black, and the stronger the better. Now, that's true, by the way. They do. The reason why seems to be related to that spindle neuron thing. Spindle neurons we had before, we've just adapted them for feeling what other people feel. What they're actually used for is differentiating tastes and smells and sounds and sights and colours. It helps us with differentiation. We've applied it to differentiating humans and emotions, but it's actually used in other animals for smell. So dogs have incredibly good spindle neurons for their sense of smell. The reason psychopaths prefer bitter drinks is because to them they're not more bitter. They can't really tell. It's why psychopaths, being tone deaf is much more likely amongst psychopathy, being colourblind is much more likely amongst psychopathy, and so on. Things that require differentiation tend to be higher amongst psychopathic populations. Yawning, by the way, is a really good way to detect them, unless you tell them that yawning is a really good way to detect them. Yawning is an empathetic reaction. If you yawn and the person across from you yawns too, it's an empathetic reaction to what you've just done. Once a psychopath knows that that's what you're looking for, of course, they will pretend to yawn. But if you just happen to yawn and the person across from you sees you do it and doesn't, red flag. Okay, so what if you've gone and employed some psychopaths? There's really 3 key things you have to do. If you are in control of them, which by the way is rare, they are usually in control of you. But because they are easily promoted, they look great, they interview well, they've got fantastic CVs, Their work is always immaculate and incredible because it's done by other people, but they're taking credit for it. So they get promoted very quickly. But if they are working for you, then you have to design a workplace that rewards honesty. They hate honesty. Honesty is their kryptonite because they can't keep track of what they said to you and what they said to you and what they said to you. Whatever they said was whatever needed to be said at that moment in time. Openness and honesty and cooperation encoded in a workplace hurts psychopaths. Privacy, secrecy, single one-on-one behind doors conversations helps psychopaths. Okay. Okay. Things you should not do if you are working for a psychopath, which is the much more usual thing. So, this is an Australian study where they've gone through and looked at what happens to people who do these things when they're working for a psychopath. None of it is good. Do not confront them. Do not shirt collar somebody and say, oh look, I think you're a psychopath. That is a really excellent way to have them have you as a target for the rest of your life. They do not wish to be exposed and they do not wish anyone to be accusing them of being a psychopath. The last thing in the world they want is anyone thinking they are a psychopath. Do not avoid, ignore or bypass them. These people they are unable to detect that because they have no empathy, they're unable to detect the feelings of others. They make up for that, rather like a blind person makes up for blindness with better hearing, they make up for that with something called cognitive empathy, which is the ability to read facial twitches, features, intonations, the obvious stuff. We can all do both. Psychopaths can only do the cognitive empathy, and they rely on it heavily and get very, very good at it. Remember, they've been doing it since they were 4. So, do not avoid, ignore or bypass them. They will detect it immediately and think there's something wrong, and then you become a target. Do not whistleblow. Do not ruminate on the wrong. Do not beat yourself up because of the way they are treating you. All of us have a tendency, when a boss is bullying us or behaving in generally the way the psychopaths do, to blame ourselves. Start thinking, what am I doing wrong? I must be not doing something. It must be me that's doing this. Normal people react that way. Psychopaths know normal people react that way and are quite happy for you to torture yourself if it makes you more obedient to them. Don't do it. Don't focus on work because they will give you plenty of busy work. Plenty of busy work. All of it aimed at making them look better. It doesn't make you feel better and just helps them. And don't take sick leave. By the way, sick leave is the first indicator of a psychopath in a normal workplace. If you see sick leave stats go off the chart, there's a psychopath there. If they're going along at normal rates and then suddenly it's like that, there's a psychopath there, and you should start looking for them. Okay, conscious of time here. These are the things you should do. Accept reality. Remember, this is temporary. You are not going to change them, ever. You cannot change them. They cannot change them, even if they wanted to. You will be leaving. The question is, how difficult is your life going to be up until the point where you leave, and how difficult is it going to be after you leave? These are the rules for making it as frictionless as possible. Okay. I like this quote because it really underlines something about psychopaths. They're not evil. They're not even evil. They don't have any concept of what we regard as morals. There's just things that help them and things that don't. And if the things that help them involve you getting hurt or killed or emotionally destroyed, then so what? As long as it helped them. And we would sit back and look at that and say, that's evil. To them it's not evil, it's just functional. They have as much feelings about other humans as we have about our stapler. It's a tool to be used. I'd like to end with a cartoon. which pretty much summarizes it. Psychopaths are humans without the empathy chip.